Hey folks, Zach Osterman here, Indianapolis Star. It is Mind Your Banners from Monday, March 4th, 2024. He's Mike Niziolek from the Bloomington Herald Times. And as promised, we teased this relentlessly, one might say, on our last Mind Your Banners that we were going to do a show specifically about the women's team as it kind of gears up for its postseason. Teri Moren's team, I think it's fair to say, fairly comfortably um, finished off their season finale, senior day, with a win over Maryland on Sunday. That clinched for the Hoosiers, the number 3 seed, correct, in the Big Ten tournament. Also, it's probably fair to say shored up a resume. Let me close out my Gmail here so we don't get a bunch of pings while we're talking. Um, Shored up an NCAA tournament resume that I think crucially looks, if not locked, then certainly on course for a top 4 seed. So I guess just to start with kind of talking about where Mike, Indiana, finished the season in terms of, essentially, I know Ohio State wins the league. I think it is probably fair to say, though, there was kind of a pronounced top 3 of Ohio State, Iowa, and Indiana. Indiana goes 1-2 against those two teams. Didn't get Ohio State and Bloomington, so it's kind of a whatever of the schedule. But Indiana goes undefeated at home for the second straight season. Obviously beat Iowa, really took care of business. Only one of the Hoosiers' 3 conference losses was to a team that finished behind them in the standings. That was it feels anyway, a bit like an aberration in Illinois. Just kind of, I know they would have had aspirations of defending the regular season title. They come up 1 game short of that, but in many respects, the season we expected as kind of the baseline from this team as one of the best in the Big Ten.
Yeah, and I think the win over Iowa was really meaningful. I think they needed a quality sort of win against, one of the top teams that, because they lost to Stanford sort of badly. They lost to Iowa in Iowa badly. And Ohio State, they lose that game on the road. So I think they needed to win that home game to sort of, like you said, shore up the resume. I don't think, we're going to talk about injuries later. But, outside of McKenzie Holmes sort of impacting the seeding, if she's out for any extended period of time, there's no reason this resume is not a top 4 seed. Like you said, the Illinois game was more of an aberration than anything else. Although Illinois played them tough twice this season, they won handily everywhere else. Looked good doing it. One of the best offensive teams in the country. But yeah, I think they needed that win at home over Iowa to sort of say, like, look, we should be considered in, among the top 16 teams in the country, because that was also a very convincing win. And I do think they need it. You mentioned, the top 3, Iowa, Indiana, Ohio State. Their combined record is 46-3 against the conference outside of the, the 3 against each other. So just dominated everywhere else.
For context, if you look at the latest net rankings, these were updated through yesterday's games. Indiana moved after the win over Maryland from 13th to 12th. I think Charlie Cream had Indiana as a 4 seed in Stanford's regional. Interestingly, obviously, that would set up a rematch that early season game that did not go so well for Indiana. But I mean, Charlie Cream is probably widely recognized as sort of the most established women's bracketologist. I think you make a good point about the Iowa game, and I think there's, I know sometimes it seems like the NCAA bristles it's some of these suggestions, but I don't think it's unfair to say that there are such a thing as style points in the net. Like that there is ultimately that the net ranking is kind of a distillation that the committee will lean on. It's not the only one, but it is a meaningful sort of data point, a very meaningful data point for the committee. And the net does have a little bit of a bend toward not just quality, but sort of the quality of the quality. If you understand what I'm saying, there's a difference maybe in the net's mind between a 2-point win and a 12-point win, that sort of thing. And so I think it felt a little bit like, both for perception and also for the metrics, maybe that Iowa game, not just winning it and having sort of that, that jewel in the center of the crown, but the way Indiana wins it, the way they play in that second half, the way they control Caitlin Clark, only 4 points, I think, after halftime. comfortably ahead by double digits for a lot of that game, certainly in control, for well over half that game, pretty much after halftime. I know Iowa kind of keeps it competitive, but I'm not sure there's really a stretch after halftime where you would feel like Iowa had taken control of the game, so to speak. That felt like, and listen, Indiana's got to maybe go to Minneapolis and at very least avoid some, anything kind of disastrous. And we'll talk about that in a second. But that Iowa game did feel like a really sort of emphatic, kind of punctuation mark on the regular season for Indiana to just sort of say, this is the class of team that we play with. We're up here with this group. You can figure out where you want to put us. Are we in the top 10, the top 12, whatever? But we belong in this group, not sort of the next rung below.
Well, and I think part of the problem was that there was such a disparity between those top three teams and the rest of the Big Ten. I mean, because if you look at their schedule, they lose that Stanford game. So, by such a wide margin, like what's their next, if they had lost that Iowa game too, what would be their most quality win? Maybe Michigan State, who locked up the 4th seed at home, Maine might, and Tennessee. And that's sort of Tennessee that was ranked at the time, but finished 17-11. Those were their most quality wins. And I think that resume wouldn't have been quite impressive enough without doing something in the Big Ten tournament, without upsetting maybe Iowa and Ohio State to sort of get that top tier seed. But I think they did, like I said, I think they did enough in the end. Would a Friday loss with a healthy McKenzie Holmes subsume that and knock them out? I'm not sure. To get Michigan or Rutgers, or was it Rutgers or Minnesota?
Yeah, it's Michigan. It's Rutgers plays Minnesota. The winner of that game plays Michigan.
And then Michigan, and then it's the winner of that. Yeah. So, and Michigan's been kind of down in recent weeks. I'm not sure because the latest 8 people had them at 12. The net has them at 12. It's right on that bubble, but they should be able to get at least. I mean, one win. I think that locks them up.
Would you call it a must win?
No, I just think one
Friday game a must win.
No, I'm not. I am not calling.
Oh, how does it feel to be in the hot seat?
No, I'm not calling it a must win. I'm not even a little bit. Because I still think they could get the top 16 with the loss.
I agree with that.
But I think it would make it a no-brainer if they do win one game in the tournament.
It is also, and listen, this isn't one of those like lipstick on a pig situations. It does feel a little bit like Indiana, especially with that Iowa win, can make a sort of credible case of, basically the only difference between us, Iowa, and Ohio State is we didn't get to play Ohio State at home. Because, Ohio State and Iowa split their 2 games. Indiana and Iowa split their 2 games. Ohio State didn't have to come to Indiana. And Ohio State's a great team. Don't get me wrong. They've had a fantastic season. They deserve champions, all that. But I think Indiana can make a credible claim that if we got, especially when you saw what Indiana did against Iowa, I think Indiana can make a credible claim that, basically, if we'd gotten our shot at Ohio State.
Don't punish us for not getting that second game where we could even it out.
Right, exactly, because that no one did that. That's just a Big Ten schedule maker thing. I mean, that's just the way the things kind of unfolded. But I think it reinforces kind of that idea that, and we'll talk about the injuries in a minute, but a healthy Indiana is at the same level that Ohio State's at, that Iowa's at least in the broadest possible sense.
Yeah, and especially and it'll be interesting on a neutral floor. I mean, I know there's going to be a lot of Iowa fans there. If Indiana is healthy, how it all shakes out this weekend, pitting those 3 teams kind of against each other.
Let's talk about the injuries. You were there Sunday, obviously, both meaningful. One that's just for all the attendant reasons going to draw more headlines. I recognize we don't know a ton, but we should kind of fill people in with just kind of what we know, where things are as best we can kind of figure it out, because especially obviously with McKenzie Holmes, that is a meaningful thing for Indiana, and one that IU fans, after obviously last season and Holmes kind of playing banged up later in the season, Indiana fans have maybe hoped to avoid a little bit.
Well, and also in conjunction with each other, right? Like if it was two
Right.
separate positions,
Yeah.
like this is exacerbating a problem.
It's
Because
like on the
now,
men's side, if it was like Malik Renew and Kalel Ware, and so suddenly like
right,
there's no
right.
sort of, the depth's just evaporated.
Yeah, so McKenzie Holmes came up sort of awkwardly on her left leg, left knee. She was under the basket, got fouled pretty hard, and came down on it. Immediately was sort of in visible discomfort and pain, tried to walk it off, tried to hop on it, tried to kind of get it loose, couldn't, came out, went right to the tunnel, stayed in there for about, through the end of the game, basically through the last minute. I guess the trainers came out pretty early and told Teri Moren that she was going to be unavailable the rest of the game. And so then as that's happening, Lily Meister comes down awkwardly on her ankle, kind of lands on somebody, twists it. There's no trainers out on the floor because they're with McKenzie Holmes, so she has to be kind of carried to the bench area and just stay there. She looked in worse shape after the game, had her shoe off, was still limping visibly as the players were kind of celebrating the final things of senior day. McKenzie Holmes looked in good spirits, didn't seem to be, limping or anything like that, but the evaluation was ongoing yesterday. They let her kind of participate in senior day activities afterwards. And Teri called her kind of day to day. They had an off day today, so no real kind of comfort information sort of came out of anything yet. But I think the concern is, if you had seen that from a player that had no injury history, you'd probably, assume, it'd be okay to be optimistic, right? Like, I mean, that makes all the sense in the world, but that's the knee that required surgery 2 years ago. That was injured last year, the left knee. And so, you obviously have to be worried because just her injury history. And, I asked Teri about that after the game, and she said, yeah, you can't let your mind go there. And so she tried to be optimistic about it, but that is your kind of first thought, essentially. You worry that once you can't put weight on the knee that she's wearing the brace on, oh no. And Teri said she's had bad luck, essentially, sort of at this time of year. And so, there's no science to that. It's just kind of being snake bit. But unfortunately, that's kind of where McKenzie's been at the last couple of years. And, you hate to see that based on his career scoring record this year, all the things, senior day kind of, it was a weird feel at the end to sort of have that kind of close out the game, that they're handily winning. They were winning by 15, throughout the second half. But obviously that's the focus. I mean, Teri said they had between day to day, like, do you rush her back or you wait because you're more worried about the NCAA double A tournament as opposed to winning the Big Ten because you already, like we said, established your resume. So they got a lot to think about if it is something based on kind of what the tests show.
And I guess the question, and I guess maybe Indiana was having some of these conversations or doing some of this calculus a year ago too, a little bit, at least, I mean, to some extent. I guess the question for me is almost, I mean, do you basically listen, the doctor can come back and with McKenzie Holmes specific, in particular, can say, we think everything's fine. She just banged it up. It maybe got a little swollen, but it's, by Friday, she'll have the extra day because they get the double bye and all this, and she should be fine. If the doctor comes back and says an extra week off would help, how much do you sort of weigh that when you maybe are in that position we talked about where you feel fairly confident you'll get a top 4 seed, when there's an extent to which maybe you could even feel it's possible to win that Friday game without her, and obviously you don't want to take, like, let's assume it's Michigan, you don't want to take anybody too lightly, but I mean that's a Michigan team that Indiana beat by 21 in Bloomington earlier this year. As you said, they've not been playing great lately. They've lost 3 of their last 5, 4 of their last 7. They've actually only won, I think, 4 times basically in the last like month and a half or so. And there's a 21-point loss to Michigan State in there, a 13-point loss at home to Illinois, a pretty bad loss at Iowa, a pretty bad loss at home to Michigan State, and so on. So maybe you feel like you can win that game. And then the other part of this too is, and we've had these conversations on the men's side in recent years, it's really easy to get swept away and sort of, oh, this team made a conference tournament run. How much did they improve their seeding? And the committee always kind of has to be in the women's teams. The women's committee is a little different because you'll have more of a gap, but there's still an extent to which the committee tries not to, sort of say, oh, they had a great last weekend, like to almost like count double for what you do in your conference tournament, and not just say, no, listen, your body of work is your body of work. I guess what I'm arguing here is like there may be some value in sort of saying, we're going to play the gamble. We're going to try and, survive as long as we can without McKenzie Holmes in Minneapolis, because the extra week off would do her a world of good for, as you said, the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, because how much would being if you were to have her, can you beat Iowa and Ohio State? And, what do you get? I mean, would it be enough to get a top seed? I don't know. I mean,
I think the
maybe.
question you'd be asking there is, would it be good enough to get, would it be good enough to bump you up to a 3? And the answer might be yes, to be honest. And that means you wouldn't have to play a 1 until the Elite 8. And so that's essentially what you're talking about. But what you have to remember again is like, all the teams out there that are gunning for 2s and 3s are probably among the favorites in their conferences as well. And so, yeah.
Yeah, and if she's unavailable or plays limited, and if Lily Meister's out as well, then it becomes really interesting. This team doesn't have a ton of depth to begin with. They don't play a lot of players, and so without Lily, yesterday, they had Yarden at the 5 and a 4-guard lineup, essentially with Lexus Bargaster coming in, and giving you 4 guards, and that's a good lineup, but then their depth, it's just almost non-existent. And so, I think they could beat Michigan, but that would be, you don't want to get run by Iowa on Saturday, but that'd be tough. But McKenzie will probably do her damnedest to play. She's obviously a tough competitor, so it's a hard balance, and this is why she came back. This is what she wanted, this to be healthy at this time of year. So, those discussions are going to be challenging for Teri to sort of balance this tournament, the NCAA tournament, McKenzie's wishes, if she's healthy enough to play. Because like you said, they'd have to probably win both to jump to a 3. And that's a pretty, over Iowa and Ohio State. And that's a pretty hard road to climb.
They would also win the Big Ten tournament, which, if we're talking about, it was important for Indiana to win that Big Ten regular season last season. It was a big milestone for the program. Teri Moren, unless I'm losing my mind, and it's possible I am, because it feels more and more like my kids delete entries out of my brain. But Teri Moren's never won the Big Ten tournament, so obviously there's an element there of the appeal of that. But yeah, I think you said it right there. McKenzie Holmes came back for the NCAA tournament and came back to the idea of trying to take this core, which has evolved, and not everybody's leaving. Obviously, they're going to lose some important players, but we heard last week or this week that Chloe moore-mcneil is coming back. There's some promising freshmen. Obviously, Sydney Parrish hit a career milestone this weekend. Yarden Garzone, I think is just kind of continues to get better. But the point is, McKenzie Holmes came back for the NCAA tournament first and foremost, and so it will just kind of be interesting to see like sort of where the calculus falls for Indiana. I guess the last question I just sort of wanted to broach, and I don't want to skip over the Big Ten tournament, but I wanted this to be sort of a postseason outlook, not just a Big Ten tournament outlook for Indiana. This team's NCAA tournament capacity, and obviously last season, I think even by their own definitions would have been disappointing. Anyone who's been a long-term sort of observer of the IU women's basketball program would say that it's it's a little bit remarkable that being a number 1 seed, being a host, etc., and then losing in the second round is disappointing for a program that had a number of NCAA tournament appearances you could count on one hand before Teri Moren arrived. But listen, this the Hoosiers obviously went to the Elite Eight in 21 in the COVID season. They went to the Sweet 16 the year after that, and that was the year that they gave UConn a bit of a game, but obviously lost in Connecticut in the Sweet 16, and then last year sort of fell short of their own sort of stated goals. I am fascinated by this team in the postseason. I think so much has been made justifiably of the 3-point shooting, but also how it dovetails with the efficiency inside, not least because of McKenzie Holmes, and that's what makes her so important. But it does give you a team that's got, steady point guard play, a lot of experience, and a remarkable amount of shot making. And it's kind of one of those where I think sometimes we look at teams and we say, in a tournament setting, you're not going to be able to make shots every night. And that's probably true. But the flip side is that Indiana's got an all-American post player, if she's healthy, of course, that they can pivot to and they can play through the post and then work their way back out from there. And the other part of this too is, that whole idea of you can't basically shoot your way through the NCAA tournament is true to an extent, except teams do it. We're only talking about needing to shoot well for, 4 games, and that gets you into a Final Four. So there's kind of that dynamic too. And I think there are things about this team that I think they could struggle with. I think athletic guards could give them trouble. Teams that have maybe a similar profile to Illinois, but with obviously, maybe more consistency or better players. But the flip side is they got size. If McKenzie Holmes is healthy, they've got balance. And I do suspect that on their night, they can shoot it against anybody. And that makes them awfully dangerous in the postseason.
Yeah, and because of the breadth of their shooters, right? They've got four in the starting lineup that average at least one made 3-pointer, and the person that's averaging at least, Chloe Moore-McNeil, hit 9 straight at one point over 2 games. So she's very capable, shooting a career high. And they only hit less than 5 3-pointers, I think, twice this season. So I mean, this is a team that even if 1 or 2 players have an off night, they still have quite a barrage. It'd be hard for all that outside of the Stanford game, really was the only time that they've all been kind of off this season. And like you said, McKenzie Holmes can certainly take over a game, just like that. And just the way teams have to defend her helps those shooters get good looks. I mean, they're double, triple teaming her, leads to a lot of soft looks. Sarah Scalia has taken, certainly taken advantage of that, shooting 43% from 3-point range this season, averaging 3.3 made 3-pointers. So, they're just a hard team to defend because of that. Teams have to put so much emphasis on trying to keep McKenzie away from the basket or limit her touches that there's always somebody open, and they've got enough players, quality scorers to make people pay. Chloe Moore-McNeil struggled yesterday shooting the ball and had 0 points, I think, through the first 2.5 quarters, and you wouldn't even know. I mean, they just have that's the offensive sort of capacity they have right now. Is just Yarden is a player that's more, I think, up and down, but she can take over a game like few other players. She's such a dynamic inside out player.
But feels like that maybe if this team has a wild card, that's a bit of a cliche. Everyone wants to ask that question at this time of year. Who's the X factor, whatever, on teams that could potentially make deep tournament runs on the men's or the women's side. She feels like that though for this team, that she can get in foul trouble sometimes, and sometimes her shot can desert her a little bit. But the flip side is she's also the sort of player that can just score 14, 15 points in a single quarter, and just suddenly she catches fire, and it's like boom. She's
as skilled of a basketball player as she's just very skilled. And so when she avoids foul trouble, like you said, that she's been at Malik Renew level foul status for stretches this season. She avoids that and gets into a rhythm. She's really tough. So I think this team has options. It's not just the 3-point shooting stands out, but it's not what defines this team, I don't think.
It's the 3-point shooting is a function of just how good the team is. I think it's not a team that is sort of built around a bunch of shooters in hopes that it can just outrun you to the finish line. It is a team of good players, talented scorers, and just having that many good scorers is going to get you is just naturally going to sort of land you with a bunch of good 3-point shooters because it just makes sense that skilled scorers will be able to shoot threes. I guess the last thing to ask, I know I said the last thing, but we'll finish this just not necessarily.
Did you go to the app? Were you advertising? Like, I mean, is this like a
No,
subtle
I just wanted to put the hat on.
advertisement?
I was just
Okay, that
wanted.
was quite the change in the middle. I
You
mean,
want me to turn it around? I can do this.
no, I just didn't know if you were making a
All right, I'll
statement.
take it off. No, I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to distract you.
Was that a political
I
statement
knew
of
I
some
already
sort?
threw you
Where's the
by asking
logo?
you if Michigan was a must win, and you totally
Is it
copped out.
is it Atlanta-based company that you're trying to advertise? Or is
Even
it?
better, it's a Liverpool-based company I'm trying to advertise.
Oh, okay, there you go.
So there you go, Transalpino. If you're watching, which
I don't know
I'm
what that
guessing,
even means.
I'm guessing they are. It was a low-cost rail service that traveled through Europe in the 70s, 80s, and 90s.
So
So,
not an advertising opportunity.
well, if they want it to be, I mean, I'll take another hat if if the good
Okay.
folks at Transalpino are watching. Um, Not to sort of end on a pessimistic note, just to sort of provide both sides here. The questions about basically what gives Indiana trouble. First of all, the injury is the big piece of it. They're a completely different team, obviously, without McKenzie Holmes. I think you mentioned it sort of in passing on top earlier, closer to the top. Like, is there a world where that could even affect their tournament seeding? I don't know. But they are a dramatically different team without McKenzie Holmes, and as you said, without even sort of Lily Meester in the depth behind her. Um, the other piece of this is just teams that I think that can challenge them athletically at both ends of the floor, because the flip side to talking about all the scoring is that Indiana probably wants more of these games to be a little bit more free flowing, a little bit more back and forth. And
Yeah,
I
they've struggled with teams that pressure at times.
Yeah, and teams that
them.
basically can slow them down and force them to be a little bit more methodical. I don't think they can't win games that way, but I think they're I think back to that Iowa game, and there were times when the game really started to just be like back and like it turned into a tennis match, and you thought, man, is this safe for Indiana? And then you realize they wanted to be, even against a team like Iowa, even against a player like Caitlin Clark, they were comfortable at that pace because they just thought we will outscore you.
Yeah.
Essentially, like if we're gonna play at this pace, no matter how good you are, we will outscore you. Teams that can slow them down offensively, can stay in front of players, can maybe scramble a little bit more effectively defensively. I think that's one area where if Indiana got into a 62 to 59 kind of game in the round 32 in the Sweet 16, something like that, I'd be curious to see how maybe if they were forced to slow down a little bit and be a little bit more deliberate in their offense. I'm not saying they can't win that way, but just teams that can pressure them, can cover them without maybe anything gimmicky, which is tough. Again, if you have a healthy McKenzie Holmes, most teams do have to double her. It just her footwork is too good, her off ball work is too good, and Indiana's ability to keep her involved in the offense is too good. But just kind of, I guess, to close, your thoughts on like what it looks like if Indiana runs, other than like, okay, they're playing South Carolina. Well, sure, if you're playing one of the best teams in the country.
If they're playing some of the best teams in the country, they could struggle. No.
Yeah, right. But like, a team that could, do a little bit of what Miami did to them last year, frankly.
Well, Ohio State was an example. They press some, they trap some, and they just made that make decisions with the ball. And in Indiana, kind of crumbled under that and couldn't get it together. And I think a team that comes out early, you've seen kind of them in the games they've gotten kind of blown out. Go down early and sort of struggle with momentum. It's a team that once it gets in a groove, it's really hard to knock them out of it. And so I think it's a team that can match them up front. I mean, you saw yesterday, they jumped out to a 16-2 lead over Maryland, and you just thought the game was over. I mean, Maryland cut it to single digits after that early in the first quarter, but it was just, I mean, they made two more runs and the game was over. So I think it's a team that kind of has some toughness, like you said, defensively, especially, that can sort of try to knock them around a little bit, get them out of their rhythm early. And that's when Indiana has struggled because, their losses this season have kind of been blowouts just because they haven't been able to get back in the game and struggled.
I can't. Hold on. Okay. Wasn't sure if I was muted. Or I wasn't muted. I was worried I was muted. the counterpoint for me is that I just you bring up that start against Maryland. Like, I don't know how many teams in the country outside of maybe the top 5 or 6 are more capable of just taking a game away from a team than Indiana, of just having like a 4 or 5 minute stretch
I mean,
where
this is a team that went one full quarter. They start. I can't remember which game it was. They didn't miss a shot in the first quarter. It was like 11 of 11. I mean, this
yeah,
team
like it's a team where it can be like 28-28 and suddenly it's 45-29.
Yeah.
And it's like, where did that, like and that's something that even last year's team, which obviously had Grace Berger, had some different dynamics to it, could score that way, but like not maybe quite as efficiently or devastatingly as this team, where you can just you can have these runs where they score on like 7 straight possessions. And it's just it suddenly feels like, the tanks are coming up over the hill on you, and you just like it you feel like you're in a game, and then boom, you're just not anymore. And I
Well,
think
and
that
because of that, and because of that 3-point shooting, that it makes it hard for teams to come back because they are going to hit those shots late in games.
I would even go more than that. Again, it's dependent on McKenzie Holmes' health, but it's sort of one of those where if they get those leads, they have offense that really won't desert them.
Yeah.
3-point shot, you can miss 4 or 5 in a row as a team and still have a good day shooting, but hey, you miss those 5 in a row, and there's a window for a team to, claw back a 7+7+8 run. You have an All-American post player. It's like, well, that's a run killer. I mean, that's a, every time the other team gets up. I mean, geez, we've seen, maybe finally in some fans' eyes, the men's team find ways to do this more recently through like Kalel Ware, of just, you know, get a lead and then just feed a big man that the other team can't slow down. And yes, maybe you're trading 3s for 2s, but if you've already got a lead, if you've already, if you're already nursing a 10-12 point lead and the other team's trying to trade baskets, even if they're making a few 3s and you're feeding McKenzie Holmes, well, she's also going to get fouled sometimes. And so then suddenly you're in foul trouble. Suddenly your rotations are messed up. She's getting some man-one opportunities. It's a team that, and most basketball teams are this way to some extent, but I think this one's more dangerous than most because of its efficiency scoring the basketball. If they get out in front of you in a meaningful way in a game on a neutral floor, or you don't have your home crowd behind you, whatever, I think it can be a problem. It can escalate quickly, and their ability to score in basically all of the most efficient ways that basketball has imagined to score, just put a ton of pressure on you. And I think that if they get a certain string of matchups in the tournament, I do think they could be very dangerous.
Well, I think they could easily make a run. And to answer your question from earlier, what would I think it would absolutely be, if they're healthy, a disappointment if this team, again with the statement, doesn't make the Sweet 16. I mean, I think there's no question that that's sort of the baseline goal. But I think they could easily rattle off, like you said, a couple wins after that.
We'll leave it there. This has been Mind Your Banners, the IU women's basketball postseason preview. Hope we've kind of laid some of it out there for you. Of course, stay tuned. HeraldTimesOnline.com, IndyStar.com/sports. We will have boots on the ground in Minneapolis. Obviously, we will have updates on McKenzie Holmes and Liam Easter as and when available. And we'll follow them all the way through because, they are certainly going to be, a team to watch in the field of 68, not just in the Big Ten tournament field, but the field of 68, whatever their sort of health status. He's Mike Niziolek. I'm Zach Osterman for the Herald Times, for the Star. Thank you so much for listening to Mind Your Banners. We will talk to you soon.